Hello and welcome back. And today I'm going to be painting this beautiful barn owl. Here's my palette. I've got a raw sienna, burnt umber, some Payne's grey, some indigo, and an orangey red colour such as quinacridone rust. I'll list them all in the description. I'll put some alternatives as well. Here's a quick swatch. The yellow and the brown mixed together give a nice mid-brown. And the umber and the blue, or indigo, mixed together give a nice grey. I'll discuss them in more detail as we go along. So the first thing I'm doing is I am wetting the white areas of the bird. So that's mostly the face and the front of the bird, the breast, chest area and the body. Now on the face I've not wet the whole lot. I want some of it to be textured and some of it to be clean, white and bright, as if it's lit from one side. So you'll see that the paint, when I drop it on, doesn't flow into the whole of the face because I've only wet this right hand side as we look at it and along the top. Now the grey colour is a mix of the burnt umber or brown colour and indigo, which gives a cool grey colour, and then it's extremely diluted and dropped onto wet paper. So the end result is a very pale, neutral grey colour. Now in the deeper recesses behind the legs of the bird, I'm added some deeper blue. It's pretty much a pure indigo, but again it's very dilute. And then I was splashing some clean water onto the white areas there to try to produce some random texture to represent feathers. Now, apologies for this first section. I didn't remember to set the focus point on my camera, so it does blur in and out a little bit at times. But I did remember later on, so it's a temporary problem. So once I've got the off-white colours done on the face and the breast, I'm going to move on to some brown colour. So here we go with some burnt umber and some of the yellow. And I've got three little swatches there on my palette. The burnt umber, which is the brown, and the yellow, which is the raw sienna. When you mix two together, you get a mid-brown, which is what I'm using here. I'm just dropping some of the brown in along the side of the nose section, the bill, and around the eyes too. Now the paint, as you can see, is still quite wet, and that has run into the white areas far more than I wanted it to, far more than I was expecting, because it's still very, very wet. But it's no problem. We can blot it out with some kitchen roll tissue. Now I'm going with some more of a pure yellow along the top of the head, and again, where this wet yellow has touched the still wet of the head face, the colour has run in. But as you can see, I'm not panicking. In fact, I'm just carrying on painting and softening this yellow area into the white with some clean water. And now I'm going to go back. And first of all, I'm going to put some yellow around the disc of the face. Now I'm going to go back and mop up that yellow went into the face, and I didn't like too much. And because it's quite a light colour, I didn't rush to do that. I didn't panic. So of course, if this kind of thing worries you, you can allow the white parts of the painted to dry completely, or even hair dry them, before you move on to this section. I kind of like the random aspects of the colours running together. Sometimes you get some really nice effects. And when the effects aren't to your liking and they're too drastic, or you just don't like them, you can block them out, as I showed just. So I'm embracing the slightly random, slightly wild effect of watercolour here. I'm not stressing over little accidents and little runs and so on. But it should be noted that if it was a very strong colour that suddenly ran, I would be in big trouble. So I'm happy to do this with this palette. Okay, so now I'm doing one of the more difficult parts of the bird, and that's the wing. I do have a reference photo in front of me, on a screen. So if you're doing this at home and you're not quite sure where to do it, which colours to put in where, I'd highly recommend that you get your own reference photo and follow that. Barn owls are differently coloured depending where in the world you live. So in Britain they're actually quite white, and in other parts of the world they can be quite darker or browner. But just find the reference areas that you like the look of and try to emulate the colours on that. Don't sweat too much over every marking, every detail. Just go for a broad colour. So if you think it's yellow, go for yellow. If you think it's brown, put some brown in. Leave a few white gaps like I did here, and then drop in some darker colours to get some mottled dark effects like this. I'm even going in with a kind of a blue colour there, and it merges in with the colours that are already on the page, and we get some nice random effects like this. So obviously I started off painting this wet onto dry, and then as I drop colours in over the top of the ones I've already painted, it's going from wet onto dry to wet into wet. And also, as you can see, I'm barely touching the brush to the paper because the paper is wet, there's wet paint on it. You don't have to be too vigorous. Now there, I'm using the other end of the brush to scratch some lines in to make some basic feather shapes or feather lines on the bottom of that wing, just to reinforce the fact that there are feathers there. And then splashing some clean water onto the whole of that wing, and then a couple of areas where it's gone into the white, which I want to protect the white, and just blotting them out with kitchen roller tissue. Now I've switched to a rigger brush, and I've got some mid to dark brown, and I've painted in the lines around the disc of the face. Then I'm using the side of the brush. This area of the painting is now dry, and so I'm getting a bit of a dry brush texture along the top of the head. Dipped up my paint into some wetter paint, and then try and scrape it across the dry area of the painting to get myself some texture on top of the head. Now I've gone to more of the bluey grey colour, which if you remember was the blue and the brown mixed together, and I painted some lines on to represent the feathers which line the outer edge of the disc. So if you look across to where the palette is, you can see that there are several puddles. They're all quite watery, all different colours, and you can keep dipping in and out of these and adjusting them to give you some variation of your tones, of your colours. So sometimes the grey is warm, sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's a little bit darker by adding more blue. Sometimes it's a little bit lighter, etc. Again, I'm following roughly a reference image here. Now I'm tapping some of the cool grey onto the top of the head to give these little lines, little bars of markings you quite often get on birds. It's not exactly the same as on the reference photo, but it's near enough. Not good enough. Put some brown, let's put some more brown here. Again, I'm trying to paint in tiny feathers that go around the edge of the face. It's a series of thin, fine lines. Now I'm painting around the eye shape. This helps to give a better sense of depth. Same for the other eye. Notice that I'm holding my brush quite close to the ferrule, the metal part, which gives me some good control. Normally I hold my brush halfway or even halfway down the handle, or even at the very end of the handle, to give myself a more loose stroke. But when I want to be very precise, like painting these thin details around the eyes, I need to hold it nearer to where the bristles are. Got some quite watery brown on there going around the eye. And because I've already got some colour underneath that, it's going to layer up into a deeper colour. Got some almost pure blue there, some of the indigo. I'm slowly building up the colours to build up texture in the face. You've got to be slightly careful here because this is a white face, and even though this will dry lighter, you still have to be slightly careful. Once you've gone too dark, it's quite difficult to come back from that. It's not impossible, but you do make your life more difficult. A few more little random marks on top of the head. And on the neck, if owls have a neck. Okay, so I am slowly building up the marks here, some of the mid to darker brown on the side, back of the head, and then some clean water just to soften it into the painting. Again, wet paint, this time onto dry paper to give myself a nice solid line. It's not going to merge, it's not going to soften, but it's quite thin paint, i.e. fairly wet. Same consistency now, and I'm kind of half painting it, half tapping it onto the wing areas to give myself some feather lines and some random markings. So I've got a reference image in front of me, and I am roughly copying what's happening on the reference, but I'm not trying to slavishly repeat it. So here I've got some marks on the wing, and I'm just tapping my brush. It's not going to give me the exact same effect as on the image, but it's close enough. So now I've got a nice neutral brown mixed. Again, it's the blue and the brown together, the indigo and the burnt umber. Quite a warm colour. And these are the feet, obviously. And then a little bit more blue into this one, so I get a slight variation in the 2 feet. don't need them to be identical. Switch back to my larger round brush, which is a number 8, as you can probably see there. So it's a round brush, it's a synthetic, absolutely fine for most purposes. You don't have to spend a fortune on sable brushes. Synthetic brushes will give you a lot of control, as you can see. Clean water there just to soften off the top of the leg area. Just put it on there, let it run into the paint. And now I've dried my brush, so it's damp, and it's I'm running it along the top of each foot, along the top of each claw area, just to lighten the colour that's underneath, give you a very basic highlight and some variation. Now I've got my pure Payne's grey, and then mix in some of the neutral brown to give myself some shadow area under each foot. Fairly random. Tap in some clean water and then just dab off the excess dots that you don't want. Let that dry. While it's drying, I'm going to put in some shadow on the wing. So I've got a brown colour. Apply that quite thin. Clean water, run it along the edge of that line, and it'll slowly soften into that wetted area. So I've let all that dry now, and as you can see, I'm now very carefully painting some of the details. Switch to number 3. Again, it's a round synthetic. This is Payne's grey. I'm getting it fairly neat. It's not super dry, but it's drier than I've been using up to now, so I'm getting good solid covering. And I clean my brush, dry it off on some tissue, as you see here, and I'm running it along the still wet eye. If you've never come across this technique before, I believe it's called lifting out. Basically, you put a damp, clean brush onto some wet paint, and the brush sucks up some of the paint. It's absolutely ideal for putting in highlights like this in the eye. Now I've got some brown. This looks like pure burnt umber, and I'm painting it around the eye. Again, to give the eye the feeling of depth, being sunk into the face. Applying some shadow just near the beak. And as I put it on, I then tap it off with my finger. A few more shadows here and there. And a few dots. Notice that I'm holding the brush here further back. So even though it's a tiny dot that's been applied, you don't have to hold the brush right at the end. You get much more freedom and control by holding it away from the bristles. Now let's deepen this shadow area here in between the legs, the back of the bird. That's the front of the bird in effect, but back of the front. So that's a slightly neutralised indigo, i.e. with a little bit of brown in it. And then some clean water, soften off that edge. Now we're back to the rigger brush, and I am painting in the claws with the Payne's grey. You need to be quite precise here, so hold the brush right at the end. The brush end, that is. Okay, and now lift off. So clean your brush, dry it off so that it's just damp, and suck up some of that paint that you've just applied, and you get a lovely soft highlighter. You don't have to spend hours doing layers, just 1 or 2 strokes, and it works well. Now, this is part of the painting is dry, so I'm just wetting it again. I'm picking up some neutral grey from my palette and letting it soften into the far recess of that area. So notice that by not cleaning my palette, I've got constant access to some neutral colours, which are going to harmonise with what I've done because they're all from the same palette. We're getting towards the end now. I'm putting some texture onto the front of the bird using some of the grey colours that I've got. I've decided to go in just to add a little bit more brown area to my wing. Purely optional this. Some downward strokes to give the appearance of, well, vertical strokes, sometimes they go up like this. Vertical strokes to give the appearance of feathers, but without painting every single feather, every single detail of every single feather. Now I've got some of the raw sienna, some indigo, just yellow and blue, and we add green. I'm going to add some green to the branch that the bird is perched on. Helps to break it up from all the greys of the bird itself. And this is the very last stage of the painting. So that paper is dry, so I'm effectively dry brushing that paint on, and there we are. It's finished. Very happy with that. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.